the mad, brilliant, and astonishing saga of Alexander Hamilton, the orphan who invented modern America. Did you know that one of America's most foundational and enduring figures was a penniless, illegitimate immigrant orphan who, just for fun, once challenged a rival to a duel using a pen? Forget what your textbooks told you. The true story of Alexander Hamilton, the boy who survived a hurricane, a plague, and the crushing poverty of a forgotten Caribbean rock to become the chief architect of the American financial system, an essential figure of the Revolution, is so packed with scandal, genius, and fatal drama that it reads like an impossible novel. His life wasn't just history, it was a non-stop, high-stakes American epic. Book 1, The Bastard Son of Nevis, 1755 to 1773. The true beginning of the American financial system, and arguably the American future, did not take place in Philadelphia, but on the sweltering, sickly, and insignificant British sugar island of Nevis in the West Indies. The year was 1755, or perhaps 1757, as Alexander Hamilton himself would later be evasive about his birth year. His life started with a stain that in the rigid society of the 18th century should have guaranteed him a life of obscurity, if not outright ruin. He was a bastard. His father, James Hamilton, was a ne'er-do-well trader and a younger son of a minor noble, a man far too shiftless and unsuccessful to marry. His mother, Rachel Fawcett, was a fiercely intelligent, spirited, and beautiful woman who had fled an abusive early marriage to a Danish Jewish planter named John Levine. Fleeing Levine's cruel domination and locking herself away in a room for months, Rachel technically became a legally condemned adulteress and a bigamist when she began her relationship with James Hamilton. This parental history, the father a runaway debtor, the mother a jailed divorcee and convicted adulteress, saddled young Alec Hamilton with a deep-seated stigma, a vulnerability that would haunt him for the rest of his life and fuel his desperate, almost pathological need for distinction. The stigma of the bastard son was a brand that Hamilton and his numerous enemies could never forget. The early years in Nevis and St. Croix were harsh schooling in survival. James Hamilton soon abandoned Rachel and his sons, leaving them utterly destitute. Rachel struggled to open a small shop in Christenstead, St. Croix, but fate was brutally unkind. In 1768, when Alexander was perhaps 13, a deadly fever swept the island. Rachel and young Alexander both contracted it. Alexander recovered. Her mother did not. Her death left him, at a fragile age, a total orphan, no money, no land, and no legitimate family to claim him.
He was temporarily taken in by a cousin, Peter Lytton, who soon committed suicide, and then by a merchant named Thomas Stevens. The young Hamilton did not spend his days weeping or begging. Instead, he plunged himself into the world of commerce. He became a clerk at the prosperous merchant house of Beekman and Kruger. While his contemporaries played, Hamilton taught himself the intricacies of international trade, currency, shipping manifests, and credit notes. He was 14 years old. The merchant, Nicholas Kruger, was frequently away, leaving the brilliant teenager in charge of a complex global operation, managing transactions from New York to Philadelphia, Europe, and the Caribbean islands. The letters Hamilton wrote during this time are astonishing. They are not the scribbles of a boy, but the sharp, commanding correspondence of a hardened businessman. In one letter, he writes an older colleague, "I am willing to risk myself and turn my thoughts another way. I wish there was a war. It would mend my circumstances." He saw chaos as opportunity. Yet his soul yearned for more than ledgers. In a letter to his father, which James never answered, the teenage Hamilton wrote with a heartbreaking blend of arrogance and vulnerability. I contemn the groveling condition of a clerk to which I seem to be doomed. I wish there was a war. This burning ambition, this genius trapped in a tropical backwater, found its outlet in words. When a devastating hurricane ripped through St. Croix in 1772, the 17-year-old Hamilton penned a vivid, dramatic description of the storm's terror and a powerful theological reflection on the event. It was published in the Royal Danish American Gazette. The essay was so sophisticated, so eloquent, and so moving that the local community was stunned. They realized they had a prodigious talent among them, a talent far too great to be wasted on sugarcane and shipping. A collection was taken up. Funds were raised by the island's governor and a few wealthy patrons, and the Orphan of Nevis was finally sent north to the American colonies in 1773, the last boat out before the gathering storm of the Revolution. He arrived in Boston a penniless immigrant, clutching only a handful of letters and a ferocious, all-consuming ambition. He was 18 years old, and his life's clock was already ticking faster than everyone else's.
Book 2, The War of the Pen and the Sword, 1774 to 1781. Hamilton initially settled in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, and then entered King's College, now Columbia University, in New York. Though a student, the political currents of the time were too strong for him to remain in the classroom. The American colonies were on the brink of revolt, and Hamilton, the immigrant outsider, became one of the most passionate and articulate defenders of the patriot cause. He traded his quill for a musket, but not before using the quill to devastating effect. In 1774-1775, while still a teenager, Hamilton published a series of anonymous pamphlets defending the rights of the colonists against the tyranny of King George III and Parliament. His two major works, A Full Vindication of the Measures of the Congress and The Farmer Refuted, were so brilliant and so deeply steeped in legal and historical knowledge that many assumed they were written by John Jay or another major colonial statesman. The pamphlets systematically dismantled the arguments of the Loyalist clergy, displaying a mastery of political theory and rhetoric that few actual politicians possessed. This was the moment Hamilton established himself as a master of persuasion, the ability to not only argue a position, but to build an unassailable framework for it. But the pen alone could not win the war. The outbreak of fighting saw Hamilton leave his studies to take up arms. He joined the Continental Army, quickly rising to the rank of captain and commanding a company of artillery. It was during the desperate campaigns in New York and New Jersey, where the Continental Army faced crushing defeat and demoralization, that Hamilton's bravery and organizational skills caught the attention of the man who would define his destiny, General George Washington. The moment came in 1777. Washington, perpetually overwhelmed, desperately needed a chief aide, a right-hand man who was multilingual, tireless, possessed of a razor-sharp mind, and, critically, knew how to write with speed, clarity, and force. He found all this in the small, fiery 22-year-old Captain Hamilton. Hamilton became Washington's aide-de-camp, a military secretary, but far more powerful in practice, and virtually his chief of staff. For 4 grueling years, Hamilton lived in Washington's shadow, managing the general's immense correspondence, drafting orders, negotiating with officers, governors, and Congress, and running the internal operation of the Continental Army.
This period was the truest finishing school in statecraft a man could ever have. By drafting Washington's most important letters and documents, Hamilton learned how the entire country operated, from high strategy to congressional pettiness, from supply chain logistics to the diplomatic dance with France. He saw the flaws of the nascent nation up close, the weak national government, the feuding state loyalties, and the disastrous collapse of public finance as Congress printed worthless paper currency. He witnessed the nation's fragile existence teetering on the edge of bankruptcy and disillusion. This experience of watching the revolution nearly fail due to a lack of central authority and a stable economy became the core, defining principle of his political life. Yet, Hamilton, ever ambitious, chafed at the desk work. He was desperate for glory, for a command that would earn him the military distinction necessary for a permanent place in the country's pantheon. In 1781, a small petty slight from General Washington, a moment where Washington, pressed for time, dismissed him abruptly, led to a volcanic resignation from the staff. Hamilton later regretted the rashness, but it bought him the one thing he craved, an active field command. His chance came at the Battle of Yorktown in October 1781. In the final, decisive assault on the British position, Hamilton was given command of a light infantry battalion. Washington assigned him the most dangerous task, the capture of Redoubt No. 10, a heavily fortified British defensive position. Hamilton, commanding his troops from the front, led a successful heroic bayonet charge in the dead of night, capturing the position in 10 minutes with minimal casualties. It was a moment of pure, decisive military glory, the culmination of his need for recognition. The victory at Yorktown effectively ended the war, and the bastard son had secured his place in history, a hero of the new republic. Book 3, The Architect of America, 1782 to 1795. The war was won, but the revolution was not over. The United States under the Articles of Confederation was a failed state, a loose collection of feuding territories, nearly bankrupt, with no power to tax, no common currency, and a debt so crushing that the nation's credit was worthless. The state of affairs verified everything Hamilton had feared. He would not stand by and let the country he had risked his life for collapse into anarchy. His transition from war hero to nation builder was immediate. He began practicing law in New York City, where his genius for legal structure was instantly apparent. More importantly, he became the most relentless, energetic, and articulate advocate for a new, powerful national government. He attended the Annapolis Convention in 1786 and drafted the call for a full constitutional convention in Philadelphia the next year.
At the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Hamilton was the most radical nationalist. Though his own proposal for a strong, semi-monarchical executive and a lifetime Senate was too extreme for the other delegates, his influence was profound. He forced the delegates to see the dire need for a truly powerful central government, for a strong executive, and for a judiciary independent of the states. When the final draft emerged, a miracle of compromise, Hamilton returned to New York to lead the fight for its ratification. This led to his most enduring literary achievement, the Federalist Papers. Co-authored with James Madison and John Jay, Hamilton wrote 51 of the 85 essays, signing his work Publius. These papers, intended merely as persuasive newspaper articles for New York voters, became the most important commentary on the Constitution ever written and the single greatest political science treatise ever produced by an American. Hamilton's essays, especially Federalist 70 on the energetic executive and Federalist 78 on the power of the judiciary, were not just arguments, they were the blueprint and the operating manual for the entire American government. It was here, in the cold, clear logic of these essays, that the immigrant orphan proved his intellectual ownership of the American system. The Constitution was ratified, and in 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the first president.
Washington, recognizing that the nation's survival depended on its finances, immediately appointed Hamilton as the first Secretary of the Treasury. It was a massive vote of confidence, but also an impossible job. The American credit rating was 0. The government owed enormous debts to foreign nations, domestic creditors, and war veterans, and there was no mechanism to pay it all.
Hamilton's tenure as Treasury Secretary, 1789-1795, is quite simply the period during which he created the modern American economy. Over a stunning 18-month blitz of legislative brilliance, Hamilton presented Congress with 4 monumental, interrelated reports, the Hamiltonian system, that were nothing less than an economic declaration of independence. The first report on public credit, 1790, the most controversial, Hamilton proposed that the national government should assume the entire war debt of the states, and that the nation's entire debt, both foreign and domestic, should be paid at face value, a principle called funding. This was a bold move that instantly established the creditworthiness of the United States. He argued that a national debt, if properly managed, was a national blessing, because it tied the wealthy creditor class to the fate of the new government. This controversial move, which required a bargain with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison to place the national capital in the South, the Compromise of 1790, saved the national credit. The second report on public credit, 1790. This proposed the creation of the first bank of the United States, the nation's first central bank. Modeled on the Bank of England, it would serve as the government's fiscal agent, hold its deposits, provide a common currency, and issue commercial credit. Jefferson and Madison vehemently opposed this, arguing it was unconstitutional because the Constitution did not explicitly grant Congress the power to create a bank, a strict construction view. Hamilton's response, the brilliant opinion on the constitutionality of the bank, introduced and defined the doctrine of implied powers, that the Constitution grants Congress powers necessary and proper for carrying out its enumerated duties. Washington sided with Hamilton. The bank was chartered, and its success cemented the idea of a powerful, flexible federal government. The Report on Manufactures, 1791, was Hamilton's economic vision for the future. He argued the U.S. could not remain merely a nation of farmers, Jefferson's ideal. It must industrialize to achieve true independence. He proposed tariffs, subsidies, and infrastructure development to encourage domestic manufacturing, laying the philosophical foundation for American industrial policy for the next century.
The Report on a National Mint, 1791. This led to the Coinage Act of 1792, which established the dollar as the nation's unit of currency, set the gold and silver standard, and created the mint, an essential step toward unifying the chaotic jumble of foreign currencies then in use. By 1795, when he resigned, Hamilton had transformed the American economy from a shambles to a stable, functioning system. He established the Coast Guard, then the Revenue Cutter Service, created the internal tax structure that led to the Whiskey Rebellion, which he advised Washington to crush forcefully, asserting the government's power, and established the foundational framework of the Treasury Department, the only one of Washington's original departments that functions largely as Hamilton designed it. He was the most powerful man in government next to Washington, and his system, the Hamiltonian vision, was the engine of American modernity. Book 4, The Fall and the Fatal Honor, 1796 to 1804. Hamilton's success came at a tremendous political and personal cost. His aggressive centralization of power and his pro-British foreign policy alienated the agrarian-minded states' rights faction led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. The result was the formation of America's first two-party system. Hamilton's Federalists, pro-industry, strong federal government, pro-bank, and Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, pro-farmer, states' rights, anti-bank. The political warfare between the two sides was brutal, vicious, and unprecedentedly personal. In 1795, seeking a reason to destroy him,
Hamilton's enemies discovered a potential scandal, a sum of money he had paid to a man named James Reynolds years earlier. They assumed it was for illegal speculation in treasury bonds. In 1797, to prove he had not abused his public office for personal gain, Hamilton was forced to publish a shocking, self-immolating 95-page pamphlet known as the Reynolds Pamphlet. In it, he confessed the true nature of the payments. They were blackmail to keep secret the fact that he had engaged in an adulterous affair with James Reynolds' wife, Maria, during the summer of 1791.
The confession was a stunning political and personal catastrophe. Hamilton explained the details of the affair and the blackmail scheme in excruciating, technical detail. He sacrificed his reputation and publicly humiliated his wife, Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton, simply to protect his political integrity, to prove that he was financially poor but not corrupt. He achieved his goal of proving he was not a financial scoundrel, but the revelation destroyed his public standing and gave his enemies a permanent weapon. No political figure in American history has ever committed such an act of political self-destruction. In the final years, though out of office, Hamilton remained a political kingmaker, and his meddling proved as fatal as his genius was essential. In the election of 1800, a bizarre electoral tie occurred between the two Democratic-Republican candidates, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, both of whom were running for president. The election was thrown to the House of Representatives. Though Jefferson was his bitter ideological enemy, Hamilton viewed his own party's nominal vice presidential candidate, Aaron Burr, with an acidic, existential contempt. Believing Burr to be a cynical opportunist devoid of any fixed principles, a far greater danger to the nation than the principled, if wrong-headed, Jefferson. Hamilton relentlessly lobbied Federalists in the House, declaring, "In a choice of evils, let us take the least. Burr is the Catiline, the most unfit man in the United States for president." Hamilton's final intervention successfully swayed the vote, making Jefferson the third president of the United States. He saved the nation from Burr, but Burr would never forget. Burr's political career was utterly stalled by Hamilton's sabotage. Desperate for a new platform, Burr ran for governor of New York in 1804. But Hamilton again worked tirelessly against him, publicly slandering Burr as a dangerous man who ought not to be trusted with the reins of government. Burr lost the election, and his career lay in ruins. For Burr, Hamilton's repeated attacks had crossed the line from political rivalry to personal demolition.
On June 18, 1804, a defeated and furious Aaron Burr sent Alexander Hamilton a letter demanding a retraction of a still more despicable opinion he had supposedly voiced at a dinner party. Hamilton refused to disavow or retract every vague insult he had ever uttered. The code of honor of the day left only one path: a duel. The same code of honor had already claimed Hamilton's eldest son, Philip, who had died in a duel just 3 years earlier, defending his father's reputation. Hamilton knew dueling was an insane, barbaric practice. He had sworn to his wife he would never do it again after Philip's death. But trapped by the iron grip of the era's gentlemanly code, which demanded that no man be seen as a coward, he felt he had no choice. He could not run for office again if he was branded a craven. He arrived at the dueling ground in Weehawken, New Jersey, on the early morning of July 11, 1804, fully intending to throw away his shot, to fire into the air and honorably satisfy the challenge without bloodshed. The details of the duel remain shrouded in the fatal mist of the moment, but the result is stark. Burr, aiming directly at his enemy, shot Hamilton in the lower abdomen. Hamilton fired his pistol high and wide into a tree branch above Burr's head. Hamilton was rowed back across the Hudson River to New York, where he died in agonizing pain the following day, July 12, 1804, at the age of 49. The man who had survived poverty, revolution, a major war, and a devastating sex scandal. The man who had authored the entire American financial system and literally written the operating manual for the U.S. government, was killed by an obsolete, absurd ritual designed to defend a man's fragile honor. The nation mourned the loss of its most brilliant, driven, and complex founder. His political system, the strong central government, the national bank, the industrialized economy, outlived him by centuries. His wife, Eliza, lived another 50 years after his death, dedicating her life to honoring his memory, collecting his papers, and co-founding the New York Orphan Asylum Society, a tribute to her husband's own orphaned beginnings. The bastard son of Nevis, the revolutionary hero, the financial wizard, the political philosopher, the brilliant and fatally flawed man, Alexander Hamilton's legacy is the very fabric of the modern United States, a testament to what sheer genius and untrammeled ambition can forge from nothing. A self-made titan of intellect and action, Alexander Hamilton was by every measure the ultimate American story. The relentless, astonishing pursuit of excellence cut short by the very code of honor he sought to master. The financial system he created is still the foundation of the world's largest economy, a profound and permanent monument built by an illegitimate immigrant orphan.